The IRS may soon be in financial trouble. Wow, maybe karma is real. Biden issues an executive order on AI, hopefully one that wasn't written using AI. And anti-Semitism is rising on college campuses faster than tuition. And more on this week's headlines. Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. Japanese scientists successfully cultured mouse embryos on the International Space Station. This means that mammals, humans specifically, could be able to breed in space despite background radiation and microgravity. Lead researcher Teruhiko Wakayama says, "We are conducting research to ensure we will be able to safely have children." Man, nothing says you've given up on this planet more than researching, hey, will we be able to breed in space? Grab your best mice and scientists. The hunt for the zero-G spot begins. Speaking of finding sweet spots, the United Auto Workers Union and General Motors have managed to negotiate a tentative deal. This could end the union strike against 3 of the nation's largest auto manufacturers. In a statement, the United Auto Workers say, like the agreements with Ford and Stellantis, the GM agreement has turned record profits into a record contract. These strikes lasted a month and a half and have been the longest U.S. auto strike in 25 years. Looks like the strikes will come to an end, which is good, and not just because the workers will be happy and production can resume, but because with an auto workers strike happening at the same time as an actors strike, they could have delayed the release of The Fast and the Furious 22. 22 Fast, 22 Furious. Hopefully the strike can end in time for everyone to meet up at the cookout and hear hologram Vin Diesel say, family. House Republicans unveiled a bill that would give $14.3 billion in aid to Israel, and it would be funded by partially defunding the IRS. New Speaker of the House Mike Johnson says, "I think if you put this to the American people and they weigh the two needs, I think they're going to say standing with Israel and protecting the innocent over there is in our national interest and is a more immediate need than IRS agents." Yeah, but that's only because Americans think everything is a more immediate need than IRS agents, because IRS agents are about as popular as stubbing your toe on a bed while your spouse is cheating on you in that bed. Making the IRS even less popular is findings by the House Judiciary Committee's subcommittee on the weaponization of the federal government that showed IRS agents committed alarming civil liberty abuses via unannounced field visits. The visits happened before the IRS announced back in July that it was ending unannounced visits to taxpayer homes, except in unique circumstances. But they include targeting individuals critical of government agencies, such as Matt Taibbi, who had an IRS agent show up outside his home the day he testified to Congress about government censorship after releasing the Twitter files. Taibbi says this kind of thing, when the government is looking for information about reporters, is usually a canary in the coal mine that something worse is coming in terms of an effort to exercise control over the press. Worse than the IRS showing up at your front door. That's got to be bad. Russian hackers breached 632,000 Department of Justice and Pentagon email addresses in a massive cyber attack. This is the latest in a string of cyber attacks by Russian-speaking criminal groups, not just in the U.S., but around the world. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency says while these attacks were committed by Russian-speaking criminal organizations, there's no hard proof that they're working on the orders of the Russian government, probably because none of them have been poisoned or thrown out a window. Next time you think your boss is bad, be grateful they're not Putin bad. The Office of Personnel Management says this latest attack didn't gain any classified information and obtained mostly email addresses, which means they can steal their Netflix accounts. And after the break, Biden issues an executive order on AI safety. Welcome back. President Biden issued an executive order to try and safely manage AI innovations moving forward. Biden says this landmark executive order is a testament to what we stand for: safety, security, trust, openness, American leadership, and the undeniable rights endowed by our Creator that no creation can take away. Yeah, Biden believes we all have rights that can't be taken away by online entities. Except, of course, the First Amendment, when his administration tried working with social media to limit free speech, allegedly. The case has been taken up by the Supreme Court. But besides that, AI can't take away from us what was given by our Creator. And by that, I of course mean whoever created this simulation we're living in. If things get too squirrely, maybe we can just do a hard reboot back to 2016 and save Harambe. Things have been extra weird since that gorilla left us. Former Vice President and not future President Mike Pence announced he was suspending his 2024 presidential campaign.
I came here to say it's become clear to me this is not my time. So after much prayer and deliberation, I have decided to suspend my campaign for president effective today.
Republican presidential candidate Chris Christie said Pence made the right decision, saying, "I want to say that Mike ran a tough race, a good race. It was very difficult for him. I think he made the right decision for he and his family to get out of the race. And look, I think in the end it just means this race is narrowing, which everyone said that it would." And Christie is right, because if anyone would know about the challenges of narrow spaces, it's Chris Christie. I feel like this will be the beginning of GOP candidates dropping like flies, specifically that one on Mike Pence's head that one time. It's not surprising that so few people are backing Pence. The last time someone told him to hang in there was almost 3 years ago, on January 6th. As for the other Republican presidential candidates, according to a poll of likely Iowa Republican caucus goers, Nikki Haley has risen and tied with Ron DeSantis for second place. But, according to the same poll, Trump is far and away the favorite, leading his closest competitors by 27 points. So they're essentially battling for a distant runner-up. This is like competing to be America's second favorite adhesive bandage. Band-Aid is so far ahead in the lead, half of you didn't know that Band-Aid is a brand name and not the product name. That's a perfect analogy, because if Trump is great at anything, it's branding. Though if he were in charge of Band-Aids, they probably would have an orange flesh tone bandage to go with their newer black and brown ones. Polls in swing states show that Trump currently has a narrow lead over President Biden. But I wouldn't count Biden out. He can come from behind and win just like he did in the 2020 Democratic primaries. That was shocking, mostly because it was one of the few times Biden came up from behind someone without smelling their hair. And after the break, will Israel and Palestine ever have a two-state solution? Welcome back. President Biden says once the current Israel-Hamas war is over, leaders in the Middle East must consider a two-state solution. This is surprising since Biden never really spoke of Palestinian statehood as a goal before Hamas's October 7th attack on Israelis. Wow, he never really thought about Palestine and is now suddenly sharing his opinion on it? So he's basically everyone I went to high school with. How are you an expert on global affairs when you've never even left our hometown, Jared? U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan wrote a detailed essay about Biden's foreign policy goals shortly before the attack, and Palestinian statehood wasn't one of them. This essay was updated afterwards to include it. One possible reason for this sudden change of course is that Michigan, a swing state, has a large Muslim and Arab population, and those voters are reconsidering support for Biden after he's gone full throttle in supporting Israel in the conflict. So a politician isn't doing something because he thinks it's right, but because it can benefit him in the polls? That adds up, yeah. In a similar vein, the White House has announced a national strategy to combat Islamophobia. This was probably done in an attempt to seem neutral, since the White House also unveiled a plan to combat rising anti-Semitism on college campuses across the country. One such instance occurred at Cornell University. Cornell President Martha E. Pollack explains, a series of horrendous anti-Semitic messages threatening violence to our Jewish community, and specifically naming 104 West, the home of the Center for Jewish Living, was posted on a website unaffiliated with Cornell. I'm surprised this is happening, because the Jewish people never get blamed for anything. Well, except space lasers, but that's totally legit. I think it's worth noting here, again, that just because the majority of Israel is Jewish, that country's government doesn't speak for all the Jewish people in the world. That would be like if America did something people don't like, and so they committed hate crimes on fat people. You can also support the Palestinian people without supporting Hamas, which is a terrorist organization. You don't need to be a college professor to figure that out. Actually, it would probably help if you weren't one, because over 100 college professors at Columbia University signed a letter defending students who blamed Israel for Hamas's attack on Israeli citizens. They write, "We feel compelled to respond to those who label our students anti-Semitic if they express empathy for the lives and dignity of Palestinians and or if they signed a student-written statement that situated the military action begun on October 7th within the larger context of the occupation of Palestine by Israel." Military action? That's a fun way of spelling slaughtering civilians. Hope they warmed up and didn't pull a muscle when they did those mental gymnastics. The The Columbia students' Israel statement received backlash, and a truck displaying the names and faces of those who signed the statement appeared on campus, labeling them anti-Semites for asking the university to cut ties with Israel. This is the third university this so-called doxing truck has appeared at, after calling out students who made similar statements at Harvard and the University of Pennsylvania. Several of the students withdrew their signatures as a result. It's almost like a generation raised entirely online doesn't realize that not everything you post is always anonymous. The internet isn't Las Vegas, kids. What happens here doesn't always stay here. And by the way, civilian deaths are horrible no matter who's doing it. According to Gaza's health ministry, over 9,000 Palestinians have been killed since the war began, and most of them have been women and minors. Although Gaza's health ministry is controlled by Hamas, and it doesn't differentiate civilians from combatants, so these figures might be worth taking with a grain of salt, which President Biden is doing. He says he doubts these numbers, but international humanitarian agencies such as Human Rights Watch and Doctors Without Borders say they're mostly accurate. And Israeli airstrikes caused massive damage and killed several Palestinians in Jambalaya, the largest refugee camp in the Gaza Strip. Israeli forces say this targeted and successfully killed a Hamas commander. So the death tolls really might be over 9,000. Wow, the situation is so dark it might be the first time in the history of the internet that over 9,000 was said and people didn't immediately think of that meme. There are growing calls for a ceasefire. Literally, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken was heckled by protesters at a Senate hearing on giving more aid to Israel. I think the most optimistic thing about Biden wanting a two-state solution when this conflict ends isn't hoping for a two-state solution, but assuming the conflict will actually ever end. But back to hate on campus. It isn't just students that are facing threats. This conflict is bringing out the worst in everybody. A Nevada man was arrested for threatening a Jewish U.S. senator over the Israel-Hamas war. This is just so needless. Why hate a politician because they're Jewish when you can just hate them because they're a politician? An Illinois man was charged with murder after allegedly stabbing a 6-year-old Palestinian child to death over the Israel-Hamas war. Seeing the way humans are acting on Earth just makes me want to abandon this planet. And no, not for the reasons you're thinking, you pervs. If you want to see a deep dive into the terrible takes on the Israel-Hamas conflict, check out this video. And if you want to make sure we can keep making episodes like this despite all the demonetization, click that orange button to support us on Patreon. All it takes is $1 an episode, and you can set a monthly limit. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching America Uncovered.